Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is John Gabel, and today I will be presenting my final project for Psych 409 titled Carl Rogers, a Historical Figure in Psychology. So, Carl Rogers was a pioneering figure whose humanistic ideas transformed the field of psychotherapy, and over the next few minutes, I will walk you through his life, key theories, and the lasting impacts of his work. So, Carl Rogers was born in 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. He was raised in a strict Protestant household with strong moral and religious values, and this conservative upbringing would eventually later contrast greatly with the more open and empathetic approach that he developed in his professional work. So, as a child, he was intelligent and curious. He started reading at age 5 and skipped first grade. And he always had a interest in science and nature, as you can see from the photo of him as a young boy. He's holding some sort of animal. So this led him to initially pursue agriculture when he first attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison. However, a life-changing trip to China during his undergrad years, um, which was a part of a Christian youth conference, this helped broaden his worldview a little bit more. It helped develop his, perspective from just his, small Midwestern childhood. And this experience led him to eventually switch his major, first to history and then to theology, where he ended up briefly attending the Union Theological Seminary. But after differences with the church, he eventually switched to going into studying psychology. He then completed his PhD at Columbia University in 1931, where he focused on child guidance and counseling techniques. And while pursuing his doctorate there, he worked with children at the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in Rochester, New York. And he also later became the director of this organization in 1930, or while he was there, he became the director. So for his family and personal life, um, Rogers met and married his wife, Helen Elliott, during college, and they remained married over 50 years. They had two children, a son and a daughter, and his daughter, Natalie Rogers, ended up following in his footsteps as a psychologist also. Rogers was deeply committed to his family, and his parenting reflected the same values that he advocated in his therapy, which was empathy, acceptance, and authenticity. He lived simply and was known for his humility, and many knew him, said that the qualities that he encouraged in others, which were openness, warmth, and genuineness, were exactly how he lived his own life. Rogers, he did end up dying on February 4th, 1987, in La Jolla, California, following complications from a fall. He was 85 years old when he passed. His death concluded a life devoted to changing the face of psychology, education, and human relationships. His focus on empathy, authenticity, and self-actualization still shape therapeutic practices around the world today, and we will get into that more shortly. So, in his professional career, Carl Rogers broke away from the more dominant schools of thought at the time, which were psychoanalysis and behaviorism. And he believed that those approaches were too focused on diagnosing and fixing people, and not enough on listening to them. So in his 1942 book counseling, and psychotherapy, Rogers introduced what he called non-directive therapy. And this method prioritized the client's voice over the therapist's direction. And eventually, this became what we now know as person-centered therapy, which is an approach that empowers clients to find their own path to healing. So, continuing Rogers' influential works in psychology, he ended up outlining 3 core conditions that he believed were essential for any successful therapy. First was unconditional positive regard, which means the therapist accepts the client without judgment and is about creating a space where people feel safe and can be themselves fully. Second is empathy. The therapist must truly understand the client's experience and communicate their understanding, and this is done through techniques like reflective listening. And third, congruence, or genuineness, which is that the therapist should be real and transparent and not hide behind a professional facade. And these core conditions help foster trust and emotional safety, which are crucial for growth, in Rogers' opinion. And beyond therapy, Rogers built a comprehensive humanistic theory around self-concept. He believed our mental health depends on how aligned our self-image, ideal self, and self-worth are. And when these elements are out of sync, that is when we experience psychological distress. He also proposed that all humans have an actualizing tendency, which is an innate drive to fulfill one's potential. He believed that when we're given empathy, acceptance, and freedom, we naturally grow toward becoming what he called a fully functioning person, or someone who lives openly, authentically, and creatively. On the scientific side of Rogers' work, some people think his humanistic psychology lacks scientific rigor, but Rogers worked very hard to prove those criticisms otherwise. So while he was working at the University of Chicago, he pioneered the process of recording therapy sessions and analyzing their transcripts. He also developed the Q-sort technique to measure changes in clients' self-concept, and these offered some of the first empirical support for therapy outcomes. And in his 1957 paper, The Necessary and Sufficient Conditions of Therapeutic Personality Change, which was the groundbreaking paper, which showed his core conditions that I just mentioned, that paper showed and provided evidence for those core conditions that they are able to bring real and measurable personality change, even without traditional diagnosis or interpretation. And so beyond the therapy room, beyond just his therapeutic work, Rogers' influence didn't stop there. In the 1960s and 70s, he applied his humanistic ideas to education, leadership, and international peace building. He worked in places like Northern Ireland, South Africa, and the Soviet Union, facilitating empathetic dialogue between conflicting groups of people at the time. Alongside his daughter Natalie and other psychologists, he ran workshops around the world which focused on person-centered communication. And he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 1987 for these global works. His work showed that empathy and listening aren't just useful solely in therapy, but they can also be tools used for resolving global conflicts as well. So today, even though person-centered therapy isn't always used on its own, like solely as its own technique, its core ideas are used in a lot of places, including modern therapies like emotion-focused therapy and motivational interviewing, which build directly on Rogers' work. And clinical training programs still emphasize empathy, acceptance, and authenticity, which were skills that he brought to the forefront. His influence can also be seen in progressive education, communication training, and even in rhetoric, with things such as the Rogerian argument, which was the name applied to the method of finding common ground instead of trying to defeat someone in a debate. So, of course, no theory is perfect, and critics argue that Rogers' approach may not provide enough structure for dealing with severe mental illnesses. And while he offered some empirical evidence, others wanted more clear cut procedures from his outcomes. Those are just some critiques of his. Um, but these critiques haven't diminished his legacy. They've actually inspired new approaches that blend structure within his humanistic values. And to conclude, Carl Rogers transformed psychology by believing in people's inherent ability to grow. He reminded us that connection, empathy, and acceptance are not just therapeutic techniques, they are powerful ways of being. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good rest of your evening.